Whispers echoed through Ironhold Castle that the royal bloodline was cursed. 1,000 elite physicians had walked through the iron gates, and 1,000 had failed. A dying 5-year-old prince lay gasping while a desperate Alpha King watched his legacy crumble until a ragged kitchen maid crossed the forbidden threshold. Rain lashed against the towering stained glass windows of Ironhold Castle, but the tempest outside was nothing compared to the storm raging within the royal bedchamber. Alpha King Roderick Vane stood at the foot of an enormous 4-poster bed, his massive hands gripping the carved mahogany footboard so tightly that the wood splintered beneath his claws. He was a terrifying figure, 6 feet and 4 inches of coiled predatory muscle, with a jaw carved from granite and piercing golden eyes that usually commanded absolute obedience from the largest pack in the Western Territories. Today, however, those eyes were bloodshot and hollow, haunted by a terrifying helplessness. On the bed lay his only son, Prince Rowan. The 5-year-old cub was drowning in his own body. Rowan's pale skin was slick with a rancid, unnatural sweat, and thick black veins spider-webbed up his neck, pulsing with a dark, toxic rhythm. His tiny chest heaved violently as he fought for every agonizing breath. The room reeked of decay, a scent of sour milk and burning hair that assaulted the sensitive noses of every werewolf present. Beside the bed stood Dr. Aris Caldwell, a renowned physician imported from the wealthy valleys of the south. He was the 1,000th healer to attempt to cure the prince. He wiped a trembling hand across his brow, his robes stained with the boy's feverish sweat. Caldwell had tried everything heated silver needles to draw out the bad blood-crushed moon pearl elixirs and ancient chanting rituals designed to awaken the dormant wolf within the child. Nothing worked. In fact, the boy's condition was deteriorating faster. "The fever is not breaking, Your Majesty," Dr. Caldwell whispered, taking a step back as Rowan convulsed violently, a piteous whine escaping the boy's chapped lips. His lycanthropic healing factor is completely suppressed. His core temperature is boiling his organs. I have exhausted my knowledge. I am deeply sorry, my king. The pup belongs to the goddess now." A low, guttural snarl vibrated through the chamber, rattling the glass vials on the apothecary table. Roderick lunged his hand, snapping around Caldwell's throat, lifting the grown man off the floor with terrifying ease. "Do not speak to me of the goddess!" Roderick roared, his fangs elongating as the alpha wolf beneath his skin surged forward in pure, unadulterated grief. "You promised me a cure. Caldwell, you swore upon your life that your southern remedies would save him." "Roderick, please!" A soft, melodic voice pleaded from the shadows of the room. Queen Valeria stepped into the candlelight. She was Roderick's second mate, taken a year after Rowan's biological mother died of a sudden illness. Valeria was breathtakingly beautiful, her sleek, blonde hair pinned up in a crown of diamonds, the scent of crushed roses radiating from her elegant form. She placed a gentle manicured hand on Roderick's rigid forearm. "My love, you are destroying yourself," Valeria murmured, her eyes brimming with practiced tears. Dr. Caldwell did his best. 1,000 healers cannot be wrong. We must face the agonizing truth. This is a genetic failing. The boy was born too weak for the wolf spirit. You must let him go before the border pack sense your vulnerability and attack the kingdom. Roderick stared at his beautiful queen, his chest heaving. Slowly he released his grip, letting the terrified doctor crumple to the stone floor. "Get out!" Roderick growled at Caldwell. "Leave the castle before I let my wolf tear you limb from limb." As the doctor scrambled away, Roderick collapsed into the chair beside his son's bed, burying his face in his hands. He was a king, but in this room, he was just a broken father. He knew what Valeria's words meant. The political pressure was immense. Lord Harrington and the rival alphas of the northern ridges were already massing their forces. An alpha king with no heir, paralyzed by grief, was an invitation for a coup. The pack demanded strength, but Roderick's heart was tethered to the dying boy on the mattress. What no one in the room noticed, however, was the subtle, cold calculation in Queen Valeria's eyes as she looked down at her dying stepson. The black veins spreading across the boy's skin were not a genetic failing. They were the result of a meticulously planned assassination, a slow drip poison that was utterly untraceable by traditional lichen physicians. Soon the boy would be gone, and Valeria could provide the king with a true, pure-blood heir of her own. 3 floors below the gilded royal chambers in the damp, cavernous bowels of the castle's laundry sector, 20-year-old Isolde plunged her blistered hands into a vat of boiling lye-filled water. Isolde was an Omega, the lowest rung of the werewolf hierarchy. In Ironhold, Omegas were treated as little more than indentured servants, stripped of property and rights. Her uniform was a tattered, ash-smudged wool dress, her rich auburn hair tied back with a frayed piece of twine. Yet despite the harsh conditions and the soot on her cheeks, there was a fierce, intelligent fire in her amber eyes. She hauled a basket of heavily soiled linens onto the stone washing table. They were the sheets from the prince's sick room, sent down to be incinerated due to the stench of the disease. As Isolde sorted through the heavy velvet blankets, her highly sensitive Omega nose twitched. Most werewolves smelled only the rot of the boy's dying flesh, but Isolde had grown up in the venomous bogs of the lower wards, raised by an outcast mother who was an apothecary of forbidden traditional herbalism. Isolde possessed an olfactory gift sharper than even an alpha's. She leaned down, pressing her nose to a sweat-soaked pillowcase. Beneath the overwhelming scent of sickness, she caught it. A faint, bitter almond sting mixed with the distinct odor of decaying pine needles. Isolde froze. The breath caught in her throat. Aconite-laced widow's weed. It wasn't a disease. The prince wasn't dying of a genetic failure or the fabled moon fever the gossiping servants whispered about. He was being poisoned. Isolde knew that smell intimately. She had watched her own little brother die from the exact same venom 3 years ago when they accidentally consumed tainted well water in the slums. Widow's weed was a vicious parasite. It bound itself to a lichen's healing factor, using the body's own regenerative magic to replicate the poison until the organs drowned in toxic black bile. Standard healers failed because they tried to stimulate the wolf's healing factor, which only accelerated the poison. The cure wasn't magic, nor was it silver. It was physical. The venom had to be violently absorbed and purged from the stomach lining before it reached the heart. "What are you standing around for, Omega?" snapped Matron Higgins, smacking Isolde's shoulder with a wooden paddle. "Burn those linens!" Isolde didn't respond. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If the prince died, the kingdom would plunge into a civil war, and the slums where her people lived would be the first to burn. She looked at her small, calloused hands. She knew the cure. She kept a small leather pouch of it in her apron pocket at all times, a paste of activated bone charcoal, weeping ash sap, and river clay, a desperate memento she carried to ensure no one else she loved would die the way her brother did. But approaching the Alpha King was a death sentence. An uninvited Omega in the royal wing would be executed on sight. If I do nothing, a child dies today. Isolde thought, the memory of her brother's cold hand slipping into her mind. Before logic could stop her, Isolde dropped the linens and bolted. She didn't take the main stairwell. She slipped into the narrow, unlit servants' passages, hidden behind the castle walls. She climbed frantically, her muscles burning her lungs, screaming for air as she ascended 3 massive floors. She burst out from a tapestry in the royal corridor, startling 2 massive armor-clad Alpha guards. "Halt, filthy cur, get back to the kitchens!" One guard barked, drawing his broadsword. Isolde didn't hesitate. She ducked under the heavy blade, relying on the sheer speed of her adrenaline-fueled panic, and threw her weight against the heavy oak doors of the royal bedchamber. The doors crashed open. Inside, King Roderick was weeping silently over his son's chest. He whipped around, his golden eyes flaring with murderous alpha rage at the intrusion. "Guards!" Queen Valeria shrieked, backing away in disgust as the soot-covered Omega tumbled into the pristine room. "Kill her! How dare this filth enter the prince's sanctuary?" 2 guards rushed in, grabbing Isolde by her arms and slamming her hard against the stone floor. The impact knocked the wind out of her, but she forced her head up, locking her amber eyes directly with the Alpha King's glowing gold. It was an act of extreme defiance for an Omega. "He's not sick!" Isolde screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "He's not sick, your grace. His gums are bleeding black, his left eye is dilated, and his sweat smells of bitter almond. It's widow's weed. He is being poisoned." The room plunged into a deafening silence. The king stood frozen, his massive chest rising and falling. Valeria's face drained of color for a fraction of a second before she masked it with outrage. "Lies. The ravings of a mad scullery maid. Roderick, execute her immediately. She is interrupting his final moments." "Wait!" Roderick commanded. His voice was dangerously low, a rumbling thunder that forced the guards to freeze in place. He looked at his son. He gently pulled back the boy's feverish lip. The gums were indeed lined with a pitch-black residue. He looked at the boy's eyes. The left pupil was blown wide, just as the Omega had said. None of the 1,000 healers had mentioned this. Roderick crossed the room in 2 strides, towering over Isolde. The sheer, crushing pressure of his alpha aura was suffocating, but Isolde did not look away. "Who are you?" Roderick demanded, his voice a lethal whisper. "My name is Isolde," she gasped, fighting the instinct to bare her throat in submission. "I can save him, but you have seconds before the venom reaches his heart. If you touch my son and he dies," Roderick vowed, his fangs grazing his lower lip, "I will rip your heart from your chest with my bare hands." "Then you will have it," Isolde said fiercely. Roderick nodded once to the guards. They released her. Valeria stepped forward in a panic. "Roderick, you cannot be serious. You are letting an Omega." "Silence, Valeria." Roderick roared, the sheer force of his command echoing off the stone walls. Isolde scrambled to her feet and sprinted to the bed. She didn't hesitate or show deference. She grabbed the dying prince, hauling his limp body upright. She pulled the small leather pouch from her apron, scooping out a thick, black, tar-like clump of the ash and clay mixture. "Hold his jaw open," Isolde ordered the king. Roderick didn't flinch at being commanded. He moved instantly, his large hands gently but firmly prying his son's jaws apart. Isolde shoved the black paste deep into the back of the boy's throat, massaging his throat muscles vigorously to force the reflex to swallow. "Now turn him on his side," Isolde instructed, grabbing a brass basin from the nightstand. She pressed 2 fingers hard into a specific nerve cluster just beneath the boy's sternum. For 3 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The boy lay entirely still. The monitors in the room, the ticking clocks, the heavy rain outside seemed to stop. Roderick's heart plummeted. He had been a fool. He raised his hand to strike the Omega down. Suddenly, Rowan's eyes snapped open. He gagged violently. With a sickening lurch, the prince vomited a massive quantity of thick, black, foul-smelling liquid into the brass basin. The stench of pure aconite filled the room, burning everyone's eyes. He coughed twice more, expelling the remainder of the toxic sludge, the clay having successfully bound to the venom lining his stomach. Instantly, a miraculous change swept over the boy. With the poison purged, his lichen healing factor, dormant and trapped for weeks, exploded into action. The black veins on his neck visibly retreated, fading back into healthy, flushed skin. His boiling temperature dropped rapidly. His ragged, wheezing breaths smoothed out into a deep, steady rhythm. Rowan blinked his golden eyes, a mirror image of his father's, focusing for the first time in a month. He looked at the massive, crying man beside him. "Father," Rowan whispered, his voice weak but clear. "I'm thirsty." Roderick let out a sob that tore from the very bottom of his soul. He scooped the small boy into his massive arms, burying his face in his son's neck, weeping without shame. Isolde stepped back, wiping the sweat from her brow, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed. She had done it. But as King Roderick held his resurrected son, his golden eyes slowly lifted, locking onto the ragged Omega standing by the bed. The exhaustion in his gaze was gone, replaced by a profound burning awe and a dark, dangerous realization. 1,000 noble healers had watched his son die, but this nameless, dirt-stained girl from the shadows had saved his world in seconds. And more importantly, someone in his castle had tried to murder his heir. As the king's lethal gaze swept the room, resting momentarily on a pale, terrified Queen Valeria, Isolde realized her life in the shadows was over. She had just walked into the center of a royal war. The silence in the royal bedchamber was heavier than lead, broken only by the steady, miraculous breathing of the young prince. King Roderick slowly rose from the edge of the mattress. The overwhelming grief that had aged him 10 years in a matter of weeks evaporated, replaced by a terrifying cold and predatory stillness. The Alpha's aura expanded, turning the air in the room dense and suffocating. He turned his golden eyes toward Queen Valeria. Valeria's pristine facade cracked. She took a stumbling step backward, her diamond tiara catching the firelight as her breathing hitched. "Roderick, my love," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Praise the goddess, the boy is healed. But we must execute this Omega immediately. She is clearly a dark witch. She brought the poison into this room to play the savior and curse our bloodline." Lies. Isolde shouted her fear, momentarily eclipsed by her righteous indignation. She wiped the soot and sweat from her brow, standing her ground against the Queen. "I have never left the laundry wards until today. The widow's weed requires a binder to be ingested without burning the throat. It requires pine oil. A very specific, expensive pine oil." Isolde flared her nostrils, her omega senses, honing in on the subtle layers of scent in the room. She pointed a trembling, blistered finger directly at the Queen. "She reeks of it. Beneath the crushed roses and jasmine, she smells of bitter almond and northern pine. She has been administering the poison drop by drop every single day." "How dare you!" Valeria shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of panic. "Guards, cut out her tongue. She is a filthy, lying cur." The two Alpha guards drew their broad swords, stepping hesitantly toward Isolde. But a low, earth-shaking growl from Roderick froze the marrow in their bones. "Sheathe your weapons," Roderick commanded softly. It was a voice that promised absolute slaughter. He walked toward his wife, his massive boots echoing like a death knell on the stone floor. "Valeria, give me your hands. Roderick, you cannot believe a scullery maid over your Queen." Valeria pleaded, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "This is madness. I love Rowan as if he were my own." "Give me your hands." Roderick roared, a sound so violently powerful that the stained glass windows vibrated. Trembling uncontrollably, Valeria extended her manicured hands. Roderick snatched her left hand, lifting it to his face. He possessed the sharpest senses of any Alpha in the Western Territories, but grief and the overwhelming stench of sickness had blinded him to the subtle scents. Now, with his mind clear, he inhaled deeply. Beneath her expensive perfumes, the faint, undeniable sting of aconite and pine oil lingered on her fingertips. Roderick's gaze dropped to the massive, intricate silver and emerald signet ring on her index finger. He gripped the ring and violently tore it from her finger, ignoring her scream of pain. With a flick of his claw, he popped open the hidden compartment beneath the emerald. A single drop of thick, black liquid rested inside. Widow's weed. "No," Roderick whispered, the betrayal slicing through his chest like a heated blade. "You watched me weep. You watched my son drown in his own blood, and you comforted me with the very hands that poisoned him." "It wasn't my idea," Valeria sobbed, collapsing to her knees, abandoning all royal dignity, as the terrifying reality of her execution loomed. It was Lord Richard Neville, the private estates of Neville, and the northern Alphas they threatened to rebel if the boy inherited the throne. They said Rowan was too weak. They promised my future son would rule. Please, Roderick, have mercy. The mention of the real private name, Lord Richard Neville, the wealthy aristocrat whose sprawling fortified estates controlled the kingdom's iron trade, shifted the atmosphere from domestic tragedy to high treason. Roderick's jaw locked. The conspiracy ran deeper than his own bedchamber. "Take her to the dungeons." Roderick ordered the guards, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Chain her in silver. If she speaks, break her jaw. Send the royal guard to the Neville estate. Burn it to the ground, and bring me Lord Richard's head." As the screaming, thrashing Queen was dragged from the room, Roderick slowly turned back to Isolde. The Omega was trembling, her adrenaline fading, leaving her utterly exhausted. She fell to her knees, bowing her head, expecting to be cast back into the dark bowels of the scullery, or worse, executed for her insolence. Instead, Roderick knelt beside her. He reached out his massive calloused hand, gently lifting her chin so she was forced to look into his glowing golden eyes. "You defied your king. You assaulted my guards. You brought unauthorized substances into my chambers." Roderick murmured, a strange, profound warmth entering his voice. "And in doing so, you saved my entire world. What is your name, little wolf? Isolde, your grace." She whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Isolde." He repeated the name, rolling off his tongue like a sacred prayer. "You are no longer an omega of the laundry wards. As of this moment, you are the High Healer of Ironhold, and you will never bow to anyone in this castle ever again." Within a fortnight, the political landscape of Ironhold had been violently, permanently reshaped. The traitorous Lord Richard Neville was executed, his lands seized, and redistributed to loyal pacts. Queen Valeria was banished to the desolate penal colonies of the frozen wastes, her name stricken from the royal archives. Yet the greatest shock to the kingdom was not the purges, but the sudden elevation of a scullery maid to the highest echelon of the royal court. Isolde stood on the balcony of her new chambers, a sprawling suite adorned with silk tapestries, roaring hearths, and shelves filled with ancient medical tomes. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet, her auburn hair washed clean of ash and braided with silver threads. She looked every inch a noblewoman, but inside she still felt like the bruised omega from the slums. "Isolde," a cheerful voice broke her reverie. 5-year-old Prince Rowan bounded into the room, his cheeks rosy and his eyes bright with life. He collided with her legs, wrapping his small arms around her waist. Isolde smiled warmly, crouching down to embrace the boy. Since the night of his miraculous cure, Rowan had developed a fierce attachment to her. He refused to take his meals or his strengthening tonics from anyone else. "Shouldn't you be at your sword practice, little prince?" Isolde teased, tapping his nose. "I escaped," Rowan giggled, looking over his shoulder. "Father is coming. He walks too slow." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors opened, and King Roderick stepped into the room. He wore a simple tunic of dark leather, stripped of his heavy royal armor, making him look less like a warlord, and more like the devastatingly handsome alpha he truly was. The moment he entered, the air shifted, crackling with a strange magnetic tension. "Rowan, go to your tutors," Roderick said, his tone gentle but firm. "I need a word with Lady Isolde." The boy pouted, but obeyed, scampering out of the room and leaving the two of them alone in the quiet suite. Isolde immediately lowered her eyes, a habit ingrained from years of servitude. "Your Grace, how may I serve you?" Roderick crossed the room, closing the distance between them until he was mere inches away. He reached out his fingers, gently tracing the line of her jaw, forcing her to look up at him. The touch sent a jolt of pure electricity straight to Isolde's core, making her gasp softly. "I told you never to bow, Isolde," Roderick murmured, his golden eyes darkening with an emotion she had never seen before. Before the crisis, Roderick's senses had been clouded by the stench of sickness and decay. Since then, the chaos of the treason trials had kept him occupied. But now, standing intimately close to her, in the quiet warmth of the afternoon sun, the king inhaled deeply. The scent hit him like a physical blow. Wild berries, rain-soaked earth, and sweet vanilla. It was a scent that bypassed his logical mind and struck directly at the primal wolf in his soul. It was a scent that commanded possession, protection, and eternal devotion. Roderick's breath hitched his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. Isolde felt it too. A sudden pulling ache in her chest, an ancient lichen magic that tethered her spirit to the massive Alpha standing before her. She trembled, her amber eyes widening in shock. "Mate," Roderick breathed the word vibrating deep in his chest. "No," Isolde whispered, stepping back in disbelief. "That is impossible. I am a low-born Omega. You are the Alpha King. The goddess would not. The goddess brought you to my door when 1,000 high-born fools failed me." Roderick interrupted fiercely, closing the distance and gripping her waist, pulling her flush against his solid, muscular chest. "You walked into a room of armed men to save a boy you didn't know. You defied a king and exposed a treasonous queen. There is nothing low-born about you, Isolde. You have the heart of a true Luna." Isolde's heart raced, tears of overwhelming emotion pricking her eyes. For her entire life, she had been treated as dirt beneath the pack's boots. To be seen, to be valued, and to be claimed by the most powerful man in the kingdom felt like a dream she was terrified to wake from. "Roderick," she breathed, using his given name for the first time. "You healed my son," Roderick whispered, leaning down, his lips brushing against hers, sending a wave of fiery warmth through her entire body. "But you also saved me, Isolde. Rule by my side. Be my queen. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are the greatest treasure this kingdom has ever known." As Roderick's lips captured hers in a deep, soul-binding kiss, the last remnants of the scullery maid faded away. The curse of Ironhold was broken. 1,000 healers had brought only despair, but one brave Omega had brought back the light, claiming not just the life of a prince, but the eternal heart of the Alpha King. Did Isolde's incredible bravery and her sweeping romance with the Alpha King leave you breathless? This tale proves that true power comes from courage, not status. If you loved this dramatic werewolf romance and want to uncover more thrilling stories of betrayal, secret poisons, and destined mates, please like this video, share it with your fellow fantasy lovers, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next epic real-life drama.